Dear all, Nora Lima, Kathleen Smith, and Rakib Misha Kogan, inviting you to join us today for the next Newcast offering. In this episode, we are super excited to have Dr. James Gordon with us, exploring the topic of trauma and how it relates to spiritual healing.
And welcome to the Spirit of Healing, the podcast with all aspects of spirit and healing from the healing activity of the Anayatiya Sufi order. You can find us at anayatiya.org.
I'm Dr. Misha Rakib Kogan, Shafayat, and the co-vice president of Healing Activity.
And I'm Nora Lima Smith, and I'm also a Shafayat and a co-vice president of the Healing Activity.
Dr. Kogan, who's a close friend of mine and a mentor for decades, actually, is the CEO of the Center of Mind-Body Medicine, a Harvard-educated psychiatrist. He founded the CMBM in 1991 to make self-awareness, self-care, and group support central to all healthcare and education system. Dr. Gordon leads a global faculty of 145 and US-based staff of 26 who have trained more than 7,000 clinicians, educators, and community leaders in the CMBM model. Those who have experienced CMBM training have spread its therapeutic and educational programs to hundreds of thousands of traumatized and stressed people all around the world. Dr. Gordon believes that regardless of age or education level, everyone has a great and largely untapped capacity to heal ourselves and one another. A peacemaker and a consensus builder, Dr. Gordon is known for cross-cultural relationship building, as well as deep life-changing therapeutic work with individuals, families, and groups. For more than 30 years, he has led CMBM teams in relieving population-wide psychological trauma and, of course, current and ongoing conflict zones, including Ukraine, during and after wars in the Balkans, Middle East, and South Sudan, after climate-related disasters in Louisiana, Texas, California, Puerto Rico, and Haiti. In fact, I can probably keep going on and on and on about different places in the world where CMBM had a powerful impact. One thing specifically I want to mention is Jim's work in veterans population, and we're going to talk about more.
Dr. Gordon is currently a clinical professor at Georgetown Medical School and was chairman under Presidents Clinton and G.W. Bush of the White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicine Policy. He is a noted author and essayist, authoring books and book chapters and publishing over 140 articles in professional journals and the popular press, including The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and The Guardian. He has also been featured on news and television programs such as CBS 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, The Today Show, CBS Sunday Morning, and channels such as CNN and Fox. Dr. Gordon also makes frequent radio appearances on programs like NPR's Fresh Air, Talk of the Nation, Science Friday, and All Things Considered. And his work has been featured on the pages of the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, and People magazine. Dr. Gordon has also authored several books, including Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing, Unstuck, Your Guide to the 7-Stage Journey, Out of Depression, Manifesto for New Medicine, Your Guide to Healing Partnerships, and the Wise Use of Alternative Therapies, and the award-winning Health for the Whole Person. His latest book, Transforming Trauma, helps readers understand that they will all experience trauma at some point in their lives, and that trauma is a human experience rather than a pathological anomaly. Drawing on current scientific research and 50 years of his own clinical experience, Dr. Gordon demonstrates how people can meet the challenges of trauma, presents head-on, and discover that there is joy, meaning, and purpose to be found.
Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Gordon.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you, Misha.
That's great. Thank you, Jim. Well, let's jump right in. I realized when we were planning this, it struck me, I've known about your work and I've been following you for decades. Actually, first as a medical student, just before we started podcast, we were talking how actually you had some contribution to medical student work, medical student wellness for a long time. But let's go back to, I guess, 80s, right? Where no one was talking about this topic of trauma. And how did you decide to jump into this? I mean, you were a psychiatrist early in the career back then. What's the roots here?
Well, I started the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in 1991. And initially, the primary work was with people who wanted to come and learn how to use a variety of forms of meditation, other self-care techniques like guided imagery and self-expression in drawings and words and movement. And we were training individual clinicians, and the work was going extremely well. And we began working in the Washington, D.C. area. That went well. We were working with primarily kids who'd come from El Salvador, who were fleeing the war there, and also working with people with significant psychological issues and people with life-threatening illnesses. And the people we trained were doing great work. We began to roll out the program nationally, and we had 120 people come to our first 7-day training back in 93 or so. And as I saw the success of the model, and as I experienced it in my own practice and working with people who were bringing it to hospitals and clinics and community-based organizations around the US, I started to wonder, well, can this also work in some of those places on the planet that are most troubled, most disturbed? And I think why trauma? Well, psychiatry is grounded. Modern psychiatry has grew out of Freud and Breuer's observations in the 19th century, late 19th century, of people who as adults were exhibiting symptoms that when they began to use Freud's method, when they began to use the method of sort of introspection and free association and self-awareness, they discovered the origins of these symptoms, whether it was a paralysis of an arm or compulsive symptom or a phobia, a fear of any animals or a fear of dark places. They discovered the origins in early life trauma. So I think it's natural for psychiatrists and anybody in mental health to want to look to trauma as the source of difficulties and to feel like, okay, this is an area where I should be doing my work. I think that the thing for me, and I realized the people I was seeing, if you've had a heart attack, if you have a cancer diagnosis, if you're in a severe depression, that is traumatic. And we began to see how our method, the method we were using of self-awareness, self-care, and mutual support, was working with individual people with all different kinds of conditions. So I thought, well, let's take this out of the consulting room. Let's take this, bring this work to people who need it most. When I went into psychiatry, one of my great teachers was Robert Coles, and I was in therapy with him. And Bob was a psychiatrist who at that point he was at the Harvard University Health Services, but and he worked with people like me, Harvard kids who were going through a rough time, and I was in medical school at the time. But he also was working with kids in the South, with the Black kids who were braving murderous mobs to integrate the schools in New Orleans and Louisiana. So that balance of working with individuals and also having a larger effect in the world, that was important to me right from the beginning. I was part of the civil rights movement, part of the anti-war movement here, and I wanted to connect up the work I did with individuals with addressing some of the larger sort of social, political issues, some of the mass psychology that was distressed by the events that were happening around us. So that's how it began, and I'm sure you're aware of how often when you're ready for something to happen, all of a sudden there open up these opportunities. And at that point, when I was ready in the mid 90s, maybe 1995 or so, someone I knew said, "Jim, don't you think you should bring the Center for Mind-Body Medicine to Bosnia?" And I said, oh, no, I don't think so. You know, they've been fighting there for so long. I'm not sure, not just this current war, but all the animosity for centuries, and the climate's going to be terrible, and I'm not going to speak the language. And then in a moment I said, but let me go, I want to go to Mozambique, because I want to see if we can bring this work to former child soldiers. So a colleague and I, Susan Lord, a family physician, and I went to Mozambique and went to South Africa, because our friend in Mozambique said, well, as long as you're coming here, you definitely should go to South Africa. And we began to use this method to teach former child soldiers, young people still, they're 18, 19 years old, who had had terrible things done to them, and they'd done terrible things to other people. We began to teach them this mind-body medicine, and we could see the benefits for these young people. And the same with people who'd lost family members because of apartheid in South Africa. So I came back to the United States after a couple of weeks in Africa, and I said to my friend, okay, let's go to Bosnia. And so that's how it began. And and that was 1996, 97. And it became so clear that one of the most compelling aspects of our work was this coming creating programs, working with local people to create programs to heal population-wide psychological trauma. So it was exciting, it worked well, and it felt like a kind of fulfillment of who I was as a psychiatrist, as a physician, and as a person as well.
Jim, could you tell our listeners a little bit about your approach and the scope and reach that the Center for Mind-Body Medicine has achieved under your leadership?
Sure. Essentially, when we began the center in 91, no money, no paid staff. You may be familiar with that kind of situation. And I just called up a bunch of people I knew, and they were doctors and therapists and teachers. And one guy who came, just volunteers coming together. They're about 20 or 25. One guy happened to be a professional gambler, which I thought was a good omen for us. So we came together, and over a year or so, we created a curriculum. And what I had seen in my work as a researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health, what I saw around me here in Washington, D.C., and with my patients, is that the whole area of self-care and of group support was sadly neglected. That there was that the overwhelming focus in all of medicine was on what the doctor can do to you or for you. And the word patient has passivity written into it. That's the notion. You go there, you surrender yourself to the doctor and do what you're told to do, then you're a good patient. If you don't do what you're told to do, you're a bad patient. And it's necessary in many instances, of course, to I ask Misha for advice and counsel, and because in certain instances where I don't know what's going on, and I may need testing, I need somebody else's expert eye. But for the vast majority of conditions that the vast majority of people have, certainly in the developed and even the developing world, there are no magic bullets. That the change that's going to come about if you're going to deal with type 2 diabetes or heart disease or depression or back pain is going to come significantly from what you can do for yourself. So the focus from the beginning was on self-care. Now, I practice Chinese medicine, and I do acupuncture, I do manipulation, and I value all of those skills. And I value, Western biomedicine, and use of antibiotics, use of other pharmaceuticals, and surgery where it's needed. But the piece that I was most interested in addressing was this self-care piece, and shifting the medical model from shifting from a medical model which was overwhelmingly governed by physicians' actions on patients, to a model in which self-care was central, as you said in the introduction, central to all healthcare. So our training from the beginning was teaching self-care techniques, and both as a balance and also as a kind of catalyst to a change in the medical model and the change in the way we as clinicians looked at ourselves. And then the other piece that was missing from modern medicine, which was part of ancient shamanic traditions, is the bringing together of people in a group for healing. And it's until you've it may seem unfamiliar because we're so stuck in the medical model of, you know, the disease is in the patient, you just take care of that one patient. But it turns out that so much of what distresses us in modern life has to do with isolation. So much of the difficulty in making changes, in the changes that are necessary if you're going to deal with chronic illness or prevent chronic illness, that the difficulty is we don't feel we can do it. We don't feel we have the strength or energy or knowledge. So I wanted to create a program which would give people the understanding, would give people the techniques and give people the scientific evidence for the efficacy of the techniques, but also a model that supported people in their healing. And the small group does that. And it's also incredibly economical. I mean, to try to teach self-care to 10 people individually takes a lot of time. To teach it to 10 people in a small group makes so much more sense. And it's so much easier to change difficult to change habits if you see that somebody else has done it. You say, oh, she's done it. Maybe I can do that too. And it's also more, it takes some of the grimness out of medicine. And when in medicine, people feel, oh, you know, I'm on the spot, you know, and somebody's going to do something to me. And there's always the focus on what's wrong. Whereas the group balances that with a sense of, you know, let's look at what we can do and let's help each other out. Let's cheer each other on. And if something difficult is going on, let's commiserate. Not spend all our time pitying, but let's let ourselves feel the compassion and the empathy that we naturally feel. So that's the model, is we train people in self-awareness, self-care in the context of small groups. So we may have a training program in which there are 200 people. There will be 20 small groups led by 20 of those 145 faculty that we have around the world. And in the first part of our training, which is either 4 or 5 days, depending on the setting, people learn about 15 or 16 self-care techniques. They practice them in the group. They have the opportunity to share with each other their experience. They learn the science behind the techniques. And we give them the resources to all the scripts for all of the self-care techniques, so that after the first 4 or 5 days, they are ready to take care of themselves. Because you can't teach self-care to other people unless you're practicing it yourself. The second part of our training, we coach people, and all of our trainees have the opportunity to lead the small group in pairs. So if you and Misha were leading, we're in our training program in what we call the advanced training, you would lead a group. And you would teach, let's say you would teach guided imagery in the group, and you would teach the science. How do images, how are they formed? How do they work in the brain? What connection do they have? How can they positively influence the immune system or improve our mood? And you would handle the group process. And then we would give you feedback, the members of the group, the other trainees, plus the faculty member, if I were the faculty member. And so the whole idea is the job of the Center for Mind-Body Medicine is to help you do your work. We don't set up big operations where we have a program in another country. It is, we may be providing services, but our primary goal is to train large numbers of people so that work can be integrated into hospitals, clinics, schools, community-based organizations, work with veterans in the VA system here in the United States, in the largest division of the VA, but also with groups of veterans coming together informally. So everywhere we go, our work is teaching, it's educational, and after the advanced training, we can provide supervision. So let's say you want to take the work out and work with people who are in hospice care, or you want to work in a medical setting. We would provide somebody, a mentor or supervisor, who was familiar with the kind of place in which you're working. And every week you'd be on either in person or on a Zoom call with that supervisor or mentor until you felt really comfortable integrating what we had to teach you into all your work. So we now, I think it's well over 7,500 people now that we've trained, both here in the United States and around the world. About 5,000 of those people have come through the advanced training as well. And in addition to the people who are on our faculty, we have hundreds of people who've been certified in our model, many, many hundreds. In the VA system alone, over 200 people have been certified, which means we've given them more supervision, we've given them more mentorship, they've come back for a second advanced training. And so the whole idea is to give people the tools they need and to help them use those tools for themselves and all those with whom they work.
You know, it struck me, you mentioned, you went all the way down. You said that the groups as the kind of a shamanic come together. I never thought of it this way. Groups are now everywhere. I mean, and so you started this model of groups where no one talked about it. I mean, this is 25 years ago, more, right?
Yeah, no, I was using these groups even before, but at the center, yes, 20, 30, 32 years ago.
Yeah.
I think, you know, Misha, you're right. It's important for people to understand that the origins are there in, you know, among indigenous people. All our ancestors would come together. I remember I was in the Sinai Desert once, and I was talking with some young Bedouin activists, and I was talking about our model. And they looked at me and they said, "Oh yeah, our grandparents used to do that. They would come together when there was a problem. That was part of our healing tradition."
It's funny how we in a healthcare system have to go back to our roots to design models of care that are actually nothing but based in some of the original deeply founded spiritual pathways to feel better. So, but let's turn to your most recent efforts. You I've been following, you've been going to Ukraine every few months, and I kept yelling at you saying it's dangerous, you have to take care of yourself. But you persisted, and you've just now trained hundreds of workers there. So talk a little bit to us about this whole, how, like, what do you do there, how you go, and what
Sure. Well, you know, what became clear to me as soon as the Russian invasion of February 2022 happened, is clear that the whole country is going to be affected by this terrible ongoing act of aggression. So I went, as I always go, with a question and an invitation. And the question is, are you interested? Are you interested in what we have to offer? And when I first went, the first time I went, I only had one name of one person in Ukraine. It was a doctor, Roman Ketcher. All I knew was he was a doctor in Lviv. And I trusted, and our programs director, you know, encouraged me to trust that somehow things would work out. And what she said to me, this is Museret Alazeh, was our programs director. Museret said, "Jim, it always unfolds." And I said, "You're right." So I crossed the border. I spent some time in Poland with Ukrainian refugees, then crossed the border, which was funny in itself. I got a ride to the border, and when I was getting out of the car, the guy who gave me the ride, he gave me this little tube of iodine, and in case of a nuclear catastrophe, you need.
That's funny, but it's not funny. They're used to that, right? I mean, you were actually not that far away from Chernobyl. If you were.
Exactly. So I went in, and I sort of got across the border and somehow managed to communicate. I have no Ukrainian words, and most of the people in Ukraine, including the driver whom I finally got to drive me to Lviv, spoke no English, but we sort of managed to communicate. And I met with Dr. Ketcher, who turned out to be exactly the right person to meet. He was the head of psychiatry at the chair of psychology at Ukrainian Catholic University. He was a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, and was well connected to people all across Ukraine. And he understood. And here's an example. One of the things that I've seen in Ukraine from the beginning is that people there during this crisis, for the most part, are willing to say, I don't know, and we need help. And what Roman said, it's quite true. He said, look, I'm really good at psychoanalysis. I'm even, I'm good at working with groups. I know how to work with the, ordinary psychiatric issues that come up. But this is a catastrophe for our whole country. I have no experience in working with whole populations, and you do, because we said we had, as you said in the introduction, we've been working in the, in the Balkans, we've been working in the Middle East, and working in Africa, and so just one thing led to another. I met a number of people in Lviv, saw people who'd been bombed and burned out of their homes, who'd fled Eastern Ukraine. Second time I went back a couple of months later, and this time I went to Kyiv, which was the capital, and had met the head of Ukrainian Psychiatric Association and met people who were working with the newly mobilized troops, and went to visit one of the hospitals taking care of combatants and veterans. So it just built, meeting people, making connections, discovering how many people were interested in our work. And ultimately, the U.S. aid representatives at the American Embassy in Kyiv, where I went on my second trip, they introduced me to a U.S. aid grantee called PACT, who were developing a public health program in 8 oblasts, 8 regions in Ukraine. Now, while these early visits, and I've been to Ukraine 5 times now since February 2022, during the early visits, we had some funding, and so we were able to do, from a wonderful man named Gordon Gund, we were able to do an online 2-day emergency training for Ukrainian therapists, doctors, educators. And 270 people came to this large and small group 2-day training, not kind of just a kind of introduction, but a powerful one. And we had 800 people on the waiting list. So it became pretty clear that, there are a lot of people who are interested already. And most recently, as a partner and subcontractor with this group PACT, we were able to hold a full 8 days of training, really 9 days, with 138 people from these 8 regions in Ukraine. And that just finished a couple of weeks ago. And it was so moving because people are drinking in what we have to offer. And they have been so traumatized and so busy taking care of other people that they haven't really tended to themselves. So the first 4 days of the training, they had the opportunity to, bring up and sometimes re-experience with all the tears and all the anger and all the fear, the trauma that they had experienced from the Russians occupying their city, or from the loss of a family member in combat, or from the anxiety that's constantly there because there are relatives who are combatants, or people living in the eastern part of Ukraine who are endangered, or people living in the houses of some of these therapists and physicians and educators who have suffered so terribly. So the first part, it was beautiful to see the change that came about. People who were really shut down physically and emotionally at the beginning of the training, but who were courageous enough to come to the training and committed enough to helping other people in Ukraine, that they would devote 9 days, really, for many of them it was 11 days, because it's hard to get around Ukraine, so it takes at least a day to get from anywhere to anywhere, pretty much. And then by the end of the training, they were changed people. I mean, if you'd looked at their faces before, that you could see the sort of either expressionless, because they've been so overwhelmed by trauma, or just the kind of tension in so many of them, or a kind of, protectiveness. By the end of the training, they're open, they're dancing, they're laughing. There's a sense of having moved through an ordeal, of having to a significant degree healed themselves, and then a commitment to taking what's been beneficial to them back out into their communities. So this is the next stage. We're now providing weekly supervision for these 138 people as they bring our model to the people in their communities. And we're hoping that this project will continue. And meanwhile, we're reaching out to work even beyond these 8 regions with veterans, with women and girls who've been brutalized by the Russian occupation, and we're I suppose this is the plea or the advertisement. We really need funds for this work. The Ukraine is a country of 46 million people, and everybody in the country has been traumatized by this war. So we are hoping to expand the program. We're going back in a small group of us. We had 18 of our team went for this training that we most recently did with 138. Small group of us, 5 of us, will be going back in November and visiting with our trainees and doing workshops and looking for partners. And I'm always looking for funding for this work.
Yeah, we'll make sure we put the link to the donate area on the Center for Mind Body Medicine. So
on this podcast, we talk about all things spirit and healing. And I'm wondering, how have you seen spirituality play into people's trauma recovery? And do you have any stories you want to share with our listeners, or anything you've learned during your research that helps to shed more light on this?
Well, it's a great question, and in a sense, the spiritual, which we don't talk about too much per se, is absolutely the animating force of the work that we do in many ways. I mean, central to all of our work is the moment-to-moment awareness of meditation. And we use many different kinds. We use concentrated meditations, like focusing on a sound or an image. We use mindfulness meditation. We teach mindful eating, mindful walking, and also expressive meditations, shaking and dancing, fast, deep breathing, which are the oldest, oldest kinds of meditation on the planet. And so our method is totally grounded in meditation, and in those moments of awareness, relaxed moment-to-moment awareness, that's the domain in which the miraculous can happen. That's the domain in which we become not only more relaxed, more physiologically balanced, more aware, but we become open to understandings and forces that are beyond our usual consciousness. It opens the door and makes it easier to connect with that realm that we call the spiritual. Second aspect is that what's part of spirituality, essential to spiritual traditions pretty much everywhere, is that sense of caring for others, that sense of loving connection. That's I mean, certainly the message at the heart of Christianity is to love one another. And our work really is about creating the opportunity for that love to emerge and treating people with that respect and that love. And in addition, or as a part of all this, what people discover is what spirituality, the spiritual dimension, often reveals to them is, why am I here? What's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? What is there that means something? Mm-hmm. And without us preaching to people, just by giving them the opportunity to make discoveries for themselves, many, many people find out what's truly meaningful to them. And that's also a kind of sort of what Paul Tillich used to call ultimate concern. That's part of ultimate concern that people establish. So our work is deeply spiritual. And again, we don't talk about it because we have one talk that's on spirituality, meaning, and purpose. But the idea is to give people, is to manifest it, to be it, rather than talk about it. And so we find that people, are saying, now I'm a changed person, and they speak about the experience. Many of the people in Ukraine said, I feel reborn. And that's their imagery. That's not the imagery that we're necessarily giving them, but that they feel that. They have a sense that they also have a sense of miracles. One of the things that happens when you come together, and you've probably seen this in your retreats. I've seen it in ashrams and many places, is that there's a different relationship to space and time that happens, that synchronous events multiply. Oh, you're just the person I wanted to talk to, and here you are sitting next to me at lunch. That sense of unforced connection, of of these little mini openings to the mysterious that happen in everyday life, and that happens during the course of our training. And so I think it's a very for those who are open or who want to see it this way, it is a spiritual experience. And for those who say that that's not for me, what they have is the experience of healing, and healing itself is a spiritual discipline. I mean, up until the last, I'm sure as you know, the last few hundred years in the West, the healers were the religious. They were the nuns. They were the priests. They were the ones who were providing the medical intervention for the most part. So, I think this connection between, which, your program is a kind of example of this connection between spirituality and healing, is deeply ingrained in the healing traditions as well as the spiritual traditions. The healing traditions we've forgotten a lot of that now. We've moved away from it, just as we were talking earlier about having moved away from the understanding of the importance of the group. We've moved away from the understanding and the experience of grounding our healing work in the spiritual.
Yeah, we sacrificed a lot of subtleties in the search for simple biomechanical answers. And and I think I love the fact that you've done so much research. I mean, there are hundreds of articles and clinical trials, actually dozens of clinical trials you've done, documenting the impact and showing the sort of the breadth of it, regardless where you've been. I think that commitment to science is essential, and we'll make sure, we don't have time to, I think, go there, but I'll make sure I put the link to description here to this video.
Thank you for mentioning. We published, we've done many evaluations, and we published, I think, 25 papers in peer-reviewed journals. The most striking finding that we was from one of the early articles we published, which was the first randomized controlled trial, which is gold standard of medical research, of any intervention with war traumatized children. There'd never been a study, a randomized controlled trial of psychotherapy or medication. So we published the first study on war traumatized kids in Kosovo. And these were young people, high school students, in a region of Kosovo called Suareka, where almost 80% of the homes were destroyed, and 20% of the high school kids lost one or both parents in the war, in the 1998-99 war. Mm-hmm. And these kids participated in a mind-body skills group in 12 groups where they learned the self-care techniques. They had an opportunity to share their experience with other high school kids. 82% of the kids who began these groups qualifying for the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, they're anxious, agitated, nightmares, flashbacks, emotional withdrawal, social withdrawal. 82% of the kids who qualified for that diagnosis using the Harvard Trauma Scale no longer qualified after 12 of these groups. And those gains held at 3 months follow-up. Now, that was a landmark study. Just as important to me and to the Center for Mind-Body Medicine is that the people leading the study were not people like me, psychiatrists, or physicians like you, or social workers or therapists. They were rural high school teachers with virtually no background in psychology whom we had trained. So what this said is the method works, and that we can train people on a large scale to use this method. And we replicated the findings in a couple more studies that we did in Gaza afterwards with war traumatized small children and adults.
Well, we're running out of time, but we can't let you go before you talk a little bit about your most recent book. It's very telling. The book is titled Transforming Trauma. And I have my copy that I read a while back, and the book is definitely a bestseller. And we'll make sure that there's a link to the Amazon where people can get the book. But talk a little bit about sort of what drove you to write this book. And I know you've done books before, many books before, but what makes this book different?
Here's the book. Here it is, Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing. It's out in paperback. You know, I wrote it because it's a way of helping people who don't have access to me or to the Center for Mind Body Medicine, of giving them a guidebook that they can use for themselves to learn the techniques of self-care. And I teach them in an order that is very similar to the way we work in our trainings and in our small groups. And a book that anyone can read. I mean, I wrote it in a way that I hope it's interesting and easy to read. It provides all the information, all of the references, and lots of stories to engage people and to help them identify with the people in the book, and particularly identify with and have the sense that they too can use these techniques. So the book begins with some stories of people who have been horrendously traumatized early in life, and who have been able to use this method to move through that and beyond that trauma and become not only fully functional, but really remarkable adults capable of helping other people with rich relationships and connections to the larger world. So I begin with that, and also with what you said in the introduction, that everyone has trauma. So this is not so strange. This is not just those other people, the people in Ukraine or the people who have been given a diagnosis of cancer. Trauma comes to all of us. So let's take it out of the realm of psychopathology and let's put it in the realm of human experience. And the book is a way of step-by-step way of teaching the tools and techniques that can help anyone deal with the trauma that they have experienced or deal with the chronic stress that they've experienced in their lives. So all the scripts for the techniques I teach: slow, deep breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth with the belly soft and relaxed, as an antidote to the fight or flight response, to help bring us into physiological and psychological balance. So I teach that at the beginning. And then I teach expressive meditations, like getting people up, shaking their bodies, and then moving to music that energizes and inspires them. So these techniques, everything is laid out step by step. Once you begin to use those two techniques as antidotes to the fight or flight response, antidote to the freeze response, the active meditations are the kind of antidote, and you start to come back into balance, it becomes easier to use all the other techniques, whether it's walking in nature or using mental imagery or exploring your drawings to mobilize your intuition and your imagination. But take people step by step through the different techniques and help them figure out which ones make most sense. Because you may like shaking and dancing, and I may like doing Tai Chi. And it's not that one is better or worse than the other. We're teaching all these techniques, and the book encourages everyone to be an experimenter, to use the technique, see what it does. If it's working for you, fantastic. If it's not, let it go. Maybe come back to it another time, try something else. And what I'm saying, I hope, in every page in the book is you can do this. This is something, and the examples I give of people who are really going through difficult times, who've managed to use these techniques to help and heal themselves. And so by the end of the book, you have, you've been had a complete program of how to help and heal yourself and move through the trauma that inevitably comes to all of us. And for people who are in our trainings or who come to the Center for Mind Body Medicine's ongoing 8 or 10 week long groups, this is the guide, the companion piece, the libretto for the particular opera of healing that we're offering to people. So it's and it's very, I think, very easy to read. People have told me they're teenage kids.
It is. It's very easy to read. It's written in a very common language, and you're going to enjoy reading it.
Relatable.
Great. So, and writing, writing is a way to communicate in a lot. I mean, it's good for me. That's part of who my expressing myself is putting it down. And it's fulfilling my desire and need to reach out as widely as I can. The book is translated now into a number of languages, including Ukrainian, and it's available, easily available from Amazon. And we use it and we give it to everybody who comes through our training and everybody who's in our groups, as well as wanting people to have it available whenever they want, wherever they want to use it. It's also in an audio book for those who prefer to listen.
Well, I think we're running out of time, Jim. It's such a privilege to have you with us and such an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much. This is a spiritual healing podcast. We're your co-hosts, Nora Lima Smith and Rakib Kogan. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Good to be with you both.
Thank you.